Every class of car has its champion. When it comes to minibuses, you might think it's something like the Volkswagen Combi because it is an icon. It's got good passenger comfort, and for a car that size, it has got a decent drive. All of which are very good points. But that doesn't mean it's the best car in its class. And that's because, quite simply, it's outsold by this car. In fact, the Hyundai H-1 bus is the class champion because it not only outsells everything else quite comprehensively, but because its sales are accelerating, where just about everyone else is going backwards. This must be one hell of a van. So, time to find out what makes this thing such a sales success. To be honest, I don't think it's going to be that easy because there's not much you can do to a bus to make it that special. Compared to its competition, it's not like this car has much more space or a much better ride or much better spec. Essentially, it's still just a bus. As far as I'm concerned, it definitely has nothing to do with the styling. Even though Hyundai have just updated the look with a new front bumper and new wheels, it's still not as striking as the Ford Tourneo or the Mercedes-Benz options. And even though it is a decent looking thing, it's not nearly as nice looking as the VW Combi. Folding up the center section of the front seat gives the H-1 space for 9, and everyone gets to sit on leather. The standard spec is pretty impressive with independent rear climate control, and up front there's just about everything you need. The list of interior updates to the diesel H-1 is fairly long and lifts it quite easily from the realm of utility passenger carrier to driver-friendly transporter. Design-wise, they've redone the center stack and changed the illumination from old-school green to standard Hyundai blue, a small touch that goes a long way to adding a lot of class. The diesel version now gets climate control and cruise control as standard, as well as electric windows and mirrors. There are a few variants of the H-1, including this bus for passengers, a panel van, and a multi-cab, which is basically a mix of the other two. Engine choices for the bus include a 2.4 petrol with a 5-speed manual, or this 2.5 turbodiesel with a 5-speed automatic. What we're driving makes more sense though, and not just because of the convenience of the automatic gearbox. The petrol engine H-1 needs a lot of revs to make you feel like you're making any kind of forward motion. This one gets off the line easily, cruises just as easily, although you do pay dearly for those privileges. The diesel H-1 is an incredible 97,000 Rand more expensive than the petrol, which is a not inconsiderable amount. So what exactly do you get? Besides those extra interior bits I mentioned earlier, there's a fractionally more fuel-efficient motor with 125 kilowatts and 441 newton meters, as well as ESP and a side airbag. What you're getting is essentially a fair bit more interior comfort and better power, but from a ride point of view, there's no difference between the petrol and the diesel model. But that ride setup is one of the biggest differences between this car and its competition. On rougher tar surfaces, the ride setup in the H-1 isn't as refined as the Combi or the Tourneo, but it's certainly not uncomfortable and not enough to detract from the overall package. And as far as other aspects of driving go, the H-1 can certainly match the others. One of the things we liked about the VW minibus was that despite its size, it was a very easy thing to drive. And it is exactly the same in here. Even though the H-1 is one of the biggest cars in its class, it has a turning circle that's smaller than an executive sedan. And parking this big box is actually fairly straightforward, even without the help of the standard park distance control. The The H-1 is another example of how very clever engineers have turned something big and ungainly looking into something that is really easy to live with from a driving point of view. Once you've spent some time with this car, it's really not too difficult to figure out why it's the top seller that it is. They've got the recipe right. It's got good spec and a good drive to make it manageable. It's got enough space to keep everyone comfortable and do what it needs to do. And it does all of that for less money than just about everything else in its class. The 2.5-litre diesel motor, helped by a good 5-speed auto gearbox, is strong and willing, and is a large part of the reason why the Hyundai H-1 is an easy car to live with. It's no surprise that this is the best-selling car in its class. It has the right measure of everything to deliver what it needs to: drivability, spec, space, and most importantly, value.